Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about the context of the next play that we'll be reading together, which is a play called Macbeth. A few things we'll cover together during this tutorial. We're going to be talking about the historical context, so what's going on at the time it was written, the beliefs at the time, some superstitious stuff surrounding the play, as well as major themes and past AP topics to keep an eye out for as we read. To start us off though, some basic information on the play. Macbeth was written by William Shakespeare in 1606. It's a tragedy, meaning that we know it's going to end in death, especially with Shakespeare, we know it's going to end in death with most characters. And it's written in the 5-act structure like all Shakespeare plays are. It's most likely that Shakespeare never actually differentiated his plays into these acts, he just kind of wrote them as one long piece. But in more modern times, editors have always split his work into the 5-act structure. And so we see that kind of symbolized over here. So Act 1 is almost always just kind of exposition, setting the scene, getting to know the characters. We see things starting to build a little bit. We see maybe the foundation for a conflict coming up towards Act 2. Act 3, suspense is building. We're kind of piqued our interest. We see what's about to unfold. Act 4, it kind of dies down a little bit, right? We have the falling action, but there's going to be one last final battle before things are put together, resolved in Act 5. So keep this in mind as we read Macbeth, this kind of template or framework of what to expect, as well as if you're reading any Shakespearean plays for your outside reading or in other classes. So to start us off, some historical context about what was happening at the time Macbeth was written. The king at the time was James I. He was not popular for a few reasons. Take a look at these dates in particular. So we see he was born in 1566, but he was already King of Scotland by 1567. At 1 year old, his parents had either passed away or fled. His mom was Mary, Queen of Scots, so there was a lot of drama there if you remember your history. And so he had to come to the throne really young. But he didn't become King of England until 1603, about 3 years before Macbeth was written, but he was King of both Scotland and England at the same time. So that led to a lot of tension, a lot of mistrust from the English people. There was tension, to say the least, between Scotland and England in the past. He also was not a direct descendant of the previous monarch, so he was not born into the throne, so there was a lot of people questioning whether or not he should be there, kind of doubting whether or not he should actually be their ruler. And then to make things worse for King James I, he was Catholic. The majority of the population in England at the time was Protestant after they had split from the Catholic Church, so that was another strike against him, so to speak. So in general, we just see a lot of dissatisfaction from the general population of England. In sharp contrast to that, the ruler before King James I was Queen Elizabeth I, and she was very well liked, very popular at the time. And so in the time between when Elizabeth was in power and when James was in power, we see a big shift in the tone of Shakespeare's plays. And that's meant to kind of reflect what the general demeanor is of the population at the time. So in the Elizabethan era, we see a lot of Shakespeare's more lighthearted plays, the comedies that end in marriage and have fairies running around pulling pranks, like in A Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing, just kind of more playful plots. Whereas in the Jacobean era, with James as king, we see a lot more of the darker, kind of more brooding dramas, such as Macbeth. So we're going to keep an eye out for that tone here as well. And depending on what Shakespeare plays you've read in the past, it might be a huge shift. So like I mentioned, King James I, not a very well-liked man in England at the time. About a year before Macbeth was written, we had an event called the Gunpowder Plot, and this was an attempt to blow up the Parliament building. It was run by a lot of Catholic people in England, where their goal was to get rid of the Protestant leaders by, in effect, killing them, and then replace them with Catholics instead. And it was led mostly by this man in the picture here. His name was Guy Fawkes. If his name looks familiar, as a side note, that's the mask that, for whatever reason, is chosen in V for Vendetta. And he was the one who was caught about to light the barrels of gunpowder that were going to be used to blow up the Parliament building. He was arrested, tortured, admitted to it. But now, actually, in Britain, every November 5th, Guy Fawkes is celebrated. But that entire plan, short term, completely backfired. So although the goal was to get more people more Catholics in power, it actually ended up taking away power from Catholics because it led to a new rule that banned Catholics from voting. So, although the intention was to add on to their influence in government, it actually ended up taking away from it. Another response to the Gunpowder Plot was something called the divine right of kings. This had come up in the past, but King James I kind of doubled down on this belief, so to speak. And the main premise is pretty simple, but has some very serious implications, and that was that kings get their power from God. So because of that belief at the time, it really meant that nobody else had the authority to dethrone the king, meaning that people couldn't call for a king to step down or be removed from power, because it wasn't people that put them in the first place, it was God in this belief. It also made it so that if you were attempting to hurt the king, that was also a religious offense, which was a big deal. That could be punishable by execution. So it added this extra level of protection for kings, where it wasn't just that, you're hurting the king if you're trying to carry out some sort of attack or attempt on their life. You're also, by extension, hurting God. So pretty clever plan here. Another really important belief at the time was something called the Great Chain of Being, which was another popular belief that God had a really ordered system for everything and that system could not be changed. So here we see it in this image, where at the very top we see Deus, God, angel, few down Homo for Homo sapien, so for mankind. So we see this really fixed ladder, and so it was this idea that you were born into a certain spot on it, and sometimes it got even more detailed, where it was kind of your place socioeconomically, your standing, and your influence in society. So it was pretty clever because it was what people genuinely believed, but it also helped quell a lot of uprisings, where, it was used to convince peasants that they didn't need to rise up against the nobles or something. That was just what God had intended for them, and that they should not necessarily fight or struggle for anything above that. With the play itself, we have a lot of superstitions around it. Macbeth and Duncan were based on real people. Those are two of our main characters. But we also have a lot with witches and witchcraft happening in the play. So because of that, it is supposedly cursed. People won't call it Macbeth on set. It'll be called the Scottish play instead. So just want to show you a short video, but I'll show you over here. Just kind of a more humorous take on what people believe will happen if you say the word Macbeth.
Take these free tickets to my play. What play? We thespians believe it's bad luck to mention the name of this particular play out loud. You mean Macbeth? Quiet, you blundering fool! You'll curse us all! What, by saying Macbeth? Stop saying it! Saying what? Macbeth! Now I've said it. I'm really sorry. That's quite all right. You didn't know. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a performance to give. Good luck! It's bad luck to say that too!
And so hopefully none of those things would actually happen if you said the word Macbeth. But either way, as we read, a few things to keep an eye out for. Some major themes. As we wrap up the semester, we're going to be talking a lot about how power is really a key part of all the readings that we've done together this semester, so we'll be reflecting on how it shows up in each book, as well as what we've studied about government. So keep an eye out for that here, as well as for examples of the supernatural, so witches, ghosts, things like that. And then another big one, changes in characters' personality or motivation, as well as guilt. Building off of that, some of the past AP topics for Macbeth. Most recently, just on the AP exam this past year, looking at characters with mysterious origins, symbols, which is pretty broad, vague, but feel free to look for as many symbols as you can. Again, that desire or struggle for power. Our favorite this semester, the tragic hero. Internal conflict, so characters feeling torn about what to do, kind of pulled in two directions. And then lastly, villains. So keep an eye out for all of this as we read, and I'm excited to start reading this with you.